Hello guys, welcome back. In this tutorial, we will go ahead and talk about attributes. Let's say you wanted to add two numbers. So what we will do is we need two numbers. So we will go ahead and store those two numbers in an attribute. So let's go ahead and just get rid of this and just rename this aura component. So first say we are going to define two attributes here. To define an attribute, there is a tag available called aura attribute tag. So just go ahead and get this aura attribute tag here, and this attribute tag requires two main things. One is the name of the attribute and one is the type of the attribute. So whenever you wanted to use an attribute, you need to provide these two things. The name means what will be the name of that attribute. Let's say the first number is going to store into number 1, and the type would be integer, because if you are storing a number, the type would be integer. And if you wanted to provide a default value, let's say if no one has provided the value and if you wanted to provide a default value, you can go ahead and provide the default value using this tag. But this is an optional one. But these two are required. So we have an aura attribute, and in that attribute, I'm defining my first attribute. The name of that attribute is num1, which is number 1, and then the type is integer. Now I also have a second attribute. The name of that attribute is, let's say, num2, and which is also of integer type, but the default value is, let's say, 20 here. So you go ahead and define second attribute here, and then let's say I wanted to define a third attribute, which is nothing but will be the sum of these two attributes. So what I'm going to do here is we're going to go ahead and define another attribute, aura, and we'll call it as attribute. The name of the attribute will be called as sum, and then the type of the attribute will be called as integer. Okay, so that's basically this is the third attribute we have. Now let's say we wanted to go ahead and first display these two numbers, that whatever the number is. So to access these number, we have to use an expression, which is, if you wanted to access what is the number 1 and what is the number 2, so there is a particular expression that you need. So you use an exclamation. V is the default one that you have to use, this particular V letter, and then you specify number 1, and then let's say you also wanted to display the value of number 2, so you go ahead and say exclamation mark V dot number 2. So this is how it's going to appear. So if you go ahead and use this one and this one, this is what will be the output. So what I'm going to do here is, let's go ahead and hit the save button and just see what happens now. So what I've done here is, let's go ahead and reload the application. So this is our application, hello2.app. Just go ahead and update preview. So now what it has done is it says 10 plus 20. So that's what it displayed. 10 is the expression that came from number 1. So if you go back to this one, number 1, and then plus is that automatically it came, and then you have number 2. So if you go ahead and change this to 30, so what's going to go ahead and update, if you go back here and update it, so let's go ahead and refresh the page, it will be 30 plus 20. So you have used 30 plus 20. Now let's say I wanted to use another one here called equal to, and I wanted to go ahead and display the value of V dot of sum. This is the one that I wanted to display. But what is the value of sum? We have not provided the value of sum yet. So let's see what happens once we run this application. So right now we have not defined that sum value, so it comes out to be empty. Now whenever, let's say this is what it is. Now let's say we define a button also. To define a button, you use something called as UI. So this is a namespace for like buttons, or like a text box or something. Let's say if you wanted to use a button, what will be the label? Label means the name of the button would be, let's say the name will be add numbers, and what will it do? So when you go ahead and hit that, right now what it is doing is, let's say I'll just go ahead and run this one. So I have defined a button whose name is add numbers. So if I go back here and run my application, I'm just explaining you very simple. Okay, so add numbers. Right now when you click on the button, nothing happens. When you click on the button, nothing happens. It shows 30 plus 20 is equals to this one. Now let's say you wanted to have this add number in the next line. So to do that, you just don't have to do anything. You just say, just use a tag called /br. That is the break. Okay, so you just use this particular tag. So this particular add numbers will appear on the next line. So this is going to be, but right now this button is not doing anything. So let's say whenever you click on this button, and let's say add numbers is nothing but the label on that number. So you can say, you can also define here, let's say click me, or we're going to say press me. We can say click me. Let's say you wanted to do something like that. So now the label on that will change. It will say press me or click me. But still, when you click on this button, nothing is happening, because in our component we have not defined what to do when you click on that. So let's say when somebody presses it, I wanted to call a method here. So let's say the name of the method is add. But where is this method defined? We have not defined it anywhere. Still, if you go ahead and do c.of_add and you run this application, nothing is happening. So if you go ahead and press click me, it gives you something has gone wrong, because you have not specified where is this add method, where is this c.of_add. You have not defined this function. So to do that, let's say you define it in a particular controller. This is called as a client-side controller. So if you want to create a controller for this particular component, you just hit the controller button here. So when you go ahead and clicked on this, we went to this controller, it created this controller for you. Okay. So what is the name of the function that you want to call? Let's say the name of the function that I wanted to call is add. This is the name of the function, and then it only takes one parameter called component. Okay, this is my function called add, and this function will get called whenever this button is clicked. Okay, so this function will get called whenever this particular button is clicked. Now what this function does, this function basically, I have a defined variable called sum. It basically, from the component, it gets the value of my variable, which is my attributes. One is v.of_number1, that was my one attribute, and the second attribute I have is component.get, and this is my second attribute, v.of_number2. So if I wanted to go, so basically it gives me the values of what is there in number 1 and what is there in the attribute number 2, and it basically does the sum of those. And then component.of_set method is basically setting the value of the variable called sum that I have created, and with this value of sum that got computed. So what this particular function is doing, it gets the value of what is in number 1. Number 1 has value of 30 in it. What is number 2? Number 2 has value of 20 in it. So it basically gives me 20 plus 30 that will be stored in the variable called sum, or we can just say value here, let's say. Okay, this is the, let's say we define another value called add value is the variable name, and we put this value in this v.of_sum. Now what is v.of_sum? v.of_sum is nothing but this particular attribute. So you are setting the value of that in this attribute. So let's go ahead and save this, and let's go ahead and run the application. So when you run it, this time when you hit this click me button, it will go ahead and set the value here to 50, which is nothing but the value of the sum attribute. So now if you wanted to change this 30 plus 20, what you're going to do is you're going to go back here and you're going to go ahead and say, okay, instead of 30, if you want 130, you go ahead and change the value here, run the application one more time, and it's going to go ahead and say 130 plus 20 is equals to 150. So this is how to use an attribute. Let me give you a quick recap. What we have done is we have defined 3 attributes. To use an attribute, you need to use this aura keyword, and then there is a tag available called attribute. Now this particular tag requires 2 parameters. One is the name and the other one is the type. Name is the name of the attribute, and type is basically what you're storing in that. It can be an integer, it can be a string, it can be anything. What is the type? This is an optional parameter called default, which is basically setting up a default value for number 1. And number 2, similarly you have defined another attribute. The name of the attribute is number 2, and there's a third attribute called sum, which is basically also of type integer, but this is equal to, when you click on this press me and click me, we have also defined a button here. When you click on that, this is the method that gets called. Now where is this method defined? This method is defined under this controller. Controller is nothing but a JavaScript for this page. Okay, so this is the JavaScript that we have, and now what we are doing in this JavaScript, we are defining, or we are getting the value of number 1 and number 2. We are adding them and storing in this variable, and then we are setting up this variable called sum, which is nothing but the attribute. We have sum. We are setting up the value of this one inside of this variable. So this is how the application runs. And Hello Deepika, when this is the application which directly calls Hello Deepika. So when you go ahead and run this, it gives you the sum of these two numbers.